novel. And also its sequel, Death's End, which I believe is the best of the trilogy, was a bestseller list of the New York Times. So here is a few facts about the major international science fiction award. So I have mentioned about Hugo Award before, right? Liu Cixin got this award in 2015 for Best Novel. And the Hugo Award and the Nebula Award actually are the two most prestigious awards in the field of International Committee of Science Fiction. So it's like the Nobel Prize for science fiction. But there's still a difference between these two. The Hugo Awards are chosen by science fiction fans. It reflects readers' interests. But the Nebula Award is chosen by science fiction writers rather than fans. So it reflects science fiction writers' preference. Okay. And these other Liu Cixin's the three-body problem trilogy. We will read the first one in this class, the three-body problem. But I will list these two, The Dark Forest and also Death's End, as one of these, recommended novel for you to choose from for your final project for this class. So you still get to read them in these two. My personal favorite is always Death's End, but it was this one that won the Hugo Award. Okay. Now let's move on. Okay. So after Liu Cixin got the Hugo Award, there's more Chinese science fiction writers start to win this Hugo Award. So in the year 2016, so Hao Jingfang, here is the author's name, Hao Jingfang. She won Best Novelty of Hugo Award for his novelty Folding Beijing. And this man standing next to Hao Jingfang is Liu Ken, the translator of the three-body problems. He also translates Hao Jingfang's Folding Beijing. That's why he is also invited her to stand next to her on the stage. Okay. So actually, that's an interesting note because one of Stephen King. Have you heard of Stephen King before? One of the famous American science fiction writer. One of his novelty was also make the final list of the Hugo Award for that year. And Hao Jingfang actually looked up to Stephen King a lot. He is a fan of Stephen King. And in the end, Hao Jingfang ends up beating Stephen King and winning the Hugo Award for that year. So it made headlines that year. Okay, so now I have finished summing up the current field of Chinese science fiction and also science fiction film. Now let's move on to some hot facts about Chinese science fiction. Let's go back in time to see actually the prehistory of Chinese science fiction. So the first text with the science fiction genre in science fiction element, probably it's better to replace the genre with science fiction element, in China can be found as early as 450 BC to 375 BC. So it really goes back a lot. So it's in one of the classics of Taoism, Liezi. This is one of the Taoist classics. We can find a story titled Yan Shi, in the chapter The Questions of Tang Wen. So the story goes like this. Yan Shi is the title character. He is a skilled mechanic. He builds a delicate automation resembling a real human being. So which can move, sing, and dance. So he is actually a performer robot. He can sing and dance very well. So Yan Shi likes to bring him to attend all the parties or banquets in the palace. Have this robot playing, singing and dancing for the king and the queen at that time. So he shows the dummy to the king one time to prove his skill. So the dummy is so delicate and convincing that the king suspects that Yan Shi is cheating him by using a real human being. So at the end, Yan Shi has to break the automation to prove that it is only made of wood and leather. So actually, Yan Shi's automation can be seen as a prototype for an early robot. Remember, this is 450 BC to 375 BC. So remember that. So the second one. Now let's go over the early history of Chinese science fiction. So science fiction, as we know today, first came to China in late Qing dynasty, which is about from 1833 to 1911. So at that time, the notion of science fiction was introduced to China through the translation of Western science fiction works, right? And in the year 1900, the Chinese translation of French author Jules Verne's Round the World in 80 Days was published. It was the first translated foreign science fiction in China. So if I put this under review test, like which one is the first translated foreign science fiction, you should be able to answer this kind of question because these are the hard facts. Okay, so next one. And the earliest, the first one is the first translation, right? The second one is the earliest original Chinese science fiction novel, is known to be Colony of the Moon, 月球殖民小记. So it was written by Huang Jiang Diaosu, obviously a pen name, which means the old fisherman by a deserted river. So the story was serialized in a journal called Illustrated Fiction in, it's a typo, 1904, not 1094, 1904 and 1905. So if I ask you, the earliest original Chinese science fiction is which one? You should be able to know is Colony of the Moon. Colony of the Moon. Okay. Now, no worries if you cannot keep up with the pace of the PPT. I will upload it to Moodle during the weekend. Okay. So next one. Now let's move on to the Republican era, which is from 1911 to 1949. So actually wars and political turmoil lasted from the late Qing period all the way to the Republican era. So there's only one prominent science fiction published during this period, and it's Lao She. Lao She is the author's name, pen name. Cat Country, 猫城记 in Chinese. It came out in the year 1932, and it may be the best known Chinese science fiction around the world before the new wave, which came in the 1989. So before 1989, Cat Country is the one and only Chinese science fiction known to, I would say, known to an international audience. Okay. So here is a few, plot of this novel. So in the novel, the main character narrated in the first person, flies to Mars, but the aircraft is crashed as soon as it arrives. So as the only survivors, the main character is taken to the city of cats by feline-faced aliens, where he then lives. Here is a book cover of 猫城记 and the feline creature alien, right? Then feline-faced alien, where he then lives. So with his ironic description of the alien community, the author criticized his own society, which is Republican China in the 1930s. Okay, so I originally decided to include maybe one chapter of this book, but I find that the book is way too expensive. There are very few copies available on Amazon, and it costs about $100. So I can't afford that as a literature instructor. So I just skipped that, but you get a story summary here. Right? Okay, so now let's move on to the next time period. So it's after 1949. So for these who are familiar with modern Chinese history, what happened in the year 1949? Yes?
Whenever the Communist Party came to be.
Yeah, the Communist Party came to power in the year 1949, right? The People's Republic of China, the Chinese government today in China mainland, was founded in this year, 1949. So a lot of things changed after this year. So after the establishment of the People's Republic of China, or PRC, in abbreviation, in 1949, the first tide of new era Chinese science fiction came in 1950s. And the science fiction writers of the period were largely influenced by science fiction from the former Soviet Union. A lot of Soviet Union science fiction works were translated into Chinese and are brought into Chinese book market during that period. Okay, and all these science fiction published in that time, Chinese science fiction published during that time, also exhibit a certain element of Soviet Union sci-fi in it. You will get to read actually two pieces in this class which reflects that change. Okay. So some of the big names at that time were Zheng Wenguang and Tong Enzheng. So Zheng Wenguang and Tong Enzheng, these two are the most prominent Chinese science fiction writer of China's socialist period. Now China has entered a post-socialist period, so everything has been different as well. Okay, so Zheng Wenguang's From the Earth to the Mars. I have mentioned this when we go over the pop quiz, right? This is actually the first science fiction story in PRC. So it's about 3 Chinese teenagers stealing a space trip and flying to Mars for adventure. Pretty straightforward. Okay. So now let's move on to the next period. Late 1970s to early 1980s. So what's happened in between is the Cultural Revolution, which lasted for about a decade, from 1966 to 1976. Cultural Revolution. It's one of the worst decades in modern Chinese history. So anything that bore any relation to Western capitalism was regarded harmful. So many science fiction writers were forced to stop writing during this time period. Okay? But after the reform and the opening up policy, Chinese science fiction revived in late 1970s. So during this time, the big name is Ye Yonglie. We will read his Closure, short story titled Closure in this class. Ye Yonglie was one of the most prestigious writers in this time period. And also Zheng Wenguang and Tong Enzheng, 2 science fiction writers from the previous socialist period, they resumed writing as well after 1970. Okay. So now, from 1983 to the present. So in 1983, there's a very important campaign. It's called the anti-spiritual pollution campaign, one of these political movement organized by the communist power higher authority, right? So which kind of wiped science fiction from their map again. So which means they only have a few good years from the late 1970s. They start writing till 1983, then they were silenced again. In this anti-spiritual pollution campaign. So why they were silenced again? Because science fiction was regarded as spiritual pollution because of the elements of capitalism and commercialization in it. Okay, so stories which talk about more than science were regarded as being harmful to politics at that time. So very few or none dared to write or publish science fiction during the period. I mean, from 1983 to 1989, they were silenced again.